Hi there, good morning. Thank you once again for joining us in my investor session webinars. And this is webinar number 4, in which we are going to discuss a very interesting topic about the closing process. We will talk about roles of notarios and lawyers, how long it takes to close, and actual closing costs. I will give you real live examples about that. Prior to getting into the closing process, I just wanted to do a quick recap of investor session 1, 2, and 3, so you can understand why we're talking about this only and in this order. The first webinar was an intro. To myself. I'm Judi Shaw. I'm the owner-broker of Living Riviera My Real Estate. I've been here since 2003. And it was an introduction to my team so that you know when you touch our website who you're dealing with, and an introduction to the concept of working with a team in Riviera Maya with a lot of experience and also licensed real estate agents. We talked about what is the Riviera Maya and where is the Riviera Maya. Specifically, after the Cancun airport, you drive south and there's a town called Puerto Morelos. That's where it's technically decided to start. And then it go all the towns and little poblados all the way south to Tulum, and anywhere in between. That's the Riviera Maya. It's a beautiful coastline, and it's a very popular destination to vacation and invest. We talked in webinar 2 about everybody's probably heard of a fideicomiso or a bank trust, and we talked about bank trust as the securest, most important way for foreigners to invest in this Riviera Maya. In fact, any restricted zone of Mexico, and the historical reasons for the fideicomiso. We also talked about the option of owning real estate in a Mexican corporation and the times and methods of doing that. And then we've also discussed the pros and considerations, all the information about wanting to buy a pre-construction property, which is brand new, built, based on floor plans and renderings, and built for you in a time frame in which you have to pay for it, or a resale property, which is, what you get. Here are the keys. Move in, turnkey, bring suitcase, open cerveza, sort of style of investing. And there are two different types, and the most important is there are pros and considerations of both. It's just, who are you? What kind of investor are you? What suits you? We can talk about any one of these topics more in depth on a personal one-to-one phone call or meeting. I just wanted to give you a recap of what we've already, covered. Also in those webinars, we covered topics about, the offer process, going to purchase contract, the time frame to close. We've talked about that already. No problem if you have more questions. At the end of this webinar, we are happy to address any and all questions, even if it's not related to the closing process, okay? And now let's get going on the closing process of what it is to close and the cost of closing. So before I go too far, about the closing process, it's important to have a little prelude about notarios. Notarios here in Mexico are the assigned authority, and they have the only authority in the land to create a new deed and assign a deed. So in the United States and Canada, it's the lawyer who conveys property between parties. And in this part of the world, it's the notario. Now, a notario has a very different role in US and Canada. Here, a notario has a very important status. First of all, a notario in Mexico is a licensed attorney for many years. They afterwards take special courses and exams. And finally, when they pass those exams, they are appointed by the governor of the state for life to be a notario. And not everyone is appointed a notario. It's for a select few. And in fact, here's an interesting stat. There's one notario for every population of 30,000 people. So it's not just being a business person, you're part government, part business, and it's an important authority in all of Mexico. Because they are the only personality in all of Mexico who can create new deeds or convey deeds between parties. They must witness the signing of the deed. So it's not just between two parties. The notario has to witness it. And believe it or not, they are responsible, the notario is responsible for paying the property transfer tax on the property purchase. So you pay the notario all the closing costs, and then he turns around and pays your property transfer tax to the government for you. They oversee the recording of the deed at the Mexican Public Registry. So they have a lot of responsibility. The other part when it comes to selling your property is the notario is the only authority who can assess, collect, and pay your capital gains tax for you. United States and Canada, we rely on our accountants, for that kind of information. And here it's the notario. So if I tell you your capital gains tax, if a lawyer tells you, well, you better be sure it comes from a notario because they are the only ones. Why? Because the government holds them accountable for the payment. If there's not, if there's not enough capital gains tax paid, the government can only go after the notario once a property is closed. They can't go after the person who sold the property, nor the person who bought the property. So that's why it's an important role here in Mexico. About lawyers. Lawyers, how they interact between you as the investor, us as the real estate advisors, and the notarios, who are almost like a demigod because they have such an authority. The lawyer is an important role in a real estate transaction here. First of all, it's a licensed attorney. They've had education at university. They represent your interests legally as a buyer. They are the ones who will draft and do the revision of the purchase contract to make sure it contains your interests. The notario, although responsible for the title, that it has to be accurate, the contract, the title, let me rephrase this, the contract that you sign usually matures into the deed in front of the notario. However, that's why you need a lawyer, because the lawyer is the one responsible for making this correct contract. And a lot of people think they don't need a lawyer, and you really do. You want them to represent your interests. The other side of that about the notario is if there's a problem during the contract phase before you go to title, what I have been told is a notario, over the years, they do not get involved in legal disputes. They can't. They're a third-party, impartial, government-appointed agent that's responsible for preparing and making sure you have a secure deed. But before that, if there's a problem at the contract level, the lawyer is the one who does that. Something that I think I forgot to mention, or probably bears mentioning now, about notarios is notarios here, they are the ones that are responsible for ensuring that you get a deed free of liens and encumbrances. In fact, the lawyer might garner all the documents that prove there's no debt. However, the notario cannot close and create a deed or convey deeds till he sees those 7 documents. So it's a form of assurance that you get a clean title, because there are 7 documents that prove there are no debt on the property. And that those documents cover debts, documents that say there's no debt to the water company, there's no debt to city works, there's no debt of property taxes, there's no debt, there's no liens and encumbrances. There's several that prove that there's no debt, and those certificates all have to be provided to the notario before in his position can witness and sign a deed. But prior to the closing, the lawyer has to create a solid contract for you. And the other thing that they do, the lawyers, they will do the due diligence of a property. They will look at the title that already exists, and they will check first at the public registry that there are no liens and encumbrances. And that's in a moment of time. Remember, there's a moment in time that everything is clean and clear. So they might do that in the beginning, and the notario has to see those 7 documents at the closing. So it's a very important process to understand. Lawyer writes the contract, represents your legal interests, makes sure everything's perfect, does the due diligence on the property, then passes that information to the notario, who then makes the deed with it. I hope I'm making sense. I know it sounds a little bit convoluted, but it feels and looks the same as when you're purchasing at home. You talk to a lawyer, the lawyer writes the contract, you interface with the lawyer, and you sign your contract, and then you're assigned a time frame to actually come and be before the notario and sign your deed. You don't really see all the background information. You don't have to do anything. I'm just telling you all the work that, you know, goes on in between. So that's why we work with vetted lawyers and notarios that we know deliver a good, clean title. So the lawyer, as I think I've alluded to, but I'll just state it in a sentence, they're the ones who coordinate with your escrow and the notario at close. We use escrow for our closings here when it comes to resale, because it's a third-party protection of your money. Your money isn't paid to the seller direct. You put your money in escrow and it stays there until close. That's in the case of a resale. In the case of a pre-construction, yes, you pay the developer directly. And so that's another, consideration. When it's time to, well, the lawyer will revise. Usually developers have a boilerplate purchase contract for their development. That's another reason that you need a lawyer and you need us, is that you don't want to just sign the boilerplate contract for the developer. You really want your lawyer to look at it, make sure it has your interests, your terms. And before, pre-lawyer, us agents, we know that there are some really great developers and some relative price points. And then there are some developers that we could suggest would be better to buy elsewhere. So anyways, your lawyer will follow up with the notario for the recording of the deed at the Mexican Public Registry. They are customer service oriented and English speaking. Very important. Not always the case with notarios. They're not always English speaking. They can be, but not always. And customer service is less important to them because they're more about the deed and the correctness of the deed than the people. That's why we work with lawyers. So far, so good. Next, we are going to talk about closing day. Closing day is a really fun day. It's the day you've been waiting for. It's the day that you sign the deed. And that's the day that funds are dispersed from escrow, and they go to the seller, and you get your keys. That's in a resale, because remember, in a pre-construction, you will have been paying the developer over the course of time while the project is being built. So there's no escrow usually with a developer. In fact, it's very rare that we use escrow with a developer. So when I refer to the closing process, the funds are dispersed from escrow when we're talking about a resale, but over time with a developer, a pre-construction property, you will have been paying over time, and by the time closing day comes, you will have already paid in full. So the end result is the same on closing day. It's when you will have paid in full, whether it's the developer or escrow, and you get the keys to your property, and you receive the certified deed that day, or maybe sometimes it's 2 or 3 days later, because remember in one of our previous webinars we discussed the fideicomiso, and there are three parts to a fideicomiso. There's you as the investor, there's the seller, and then there's the trustee. The trustee is the bank fiduciary who is also party to your bank trust, and they have to sign. So usually, even though you sign the deed and funds change hands and you get the keys, you might not get the certified copy for 2 or 3 days till after the bank fiduciary trustee has signed. That said, there is another part to the deed. You get your certified copy, but the registered copy can come anywhere between 3 months to 6 months after. And why is the registered copy so important, and what is the registered copy? So you have the certified copy of your deed with the Notario stamp at the top, and you think that's it, you're done, you're closed. When you want to sell, you have to have the registered copy of the deed. And the registered copy is a copy of your deed that has been placed at the Mexican Public Land Registry Office or properties. It's called Registro Público Propiedad. That's the RPP, or the registered public property of land. Let me say that again. It's the property registry office in English. It's very straightforward. Registro Público Propiedad. That's the RPP. So the notario has to take your certified deed and register it. It takes that government agency anywhere between 3 to 6 months. When it's registered, it's got another stamp on the back, and you get something called the Boleta de Registro. Okay? And that is the final thing that says this deed is now a public deed, publicly registered at the Mexican Public Registry. Without that, you can't sell your property. It's just a government process, and most people leave the lawyer's office or the notario's office with their certified deed feeling they're very complete. But in fact, remember to get your registered copy once, 3 to 6 months. Put a note in your iCal or your calendar to remind yourself to get back with the lawyer. They're supposed to get in touch with you. However, it's, people get busy, and really it's your deed and you want it. So the public deed is the important document for you. Okay, I hope that was clear. Let's talk about that in question and answer if it's not after the fact, okay? So we're going to move on to closing costs. So what I'm going to show you here about closing costs, you will receive this document from your lawyer. Again, that's another important reason why you work with lawyers, because they interact with the notarios. And so the lawyer will provide you a closing cost estimate or a closing cost budget prior to your close, so you can see everything, really clearly. And what I'm going to show you is some real estimate closing costs for transactions that have happened in the year 2020. Okay, so we're dealing with current real-time closes that have happened recently. So for this first one, it was a property, a condominium in the area of El Cielo, which is a residential community just north of the town of Playa del Carmen. It's very popular amongst investors right now because there are some great prices in that area. That said, let's talk about the costs, line item by line item. So first, when investors ask us, what are the closing costs? And we tell people 7%, immediately they feel that that's very expensive. And before I go into the closing costs, I'd like to say, yes, it sounds expensive. Keep in mind that your property tax is going to be, $400 a year? $400 a year. Yeah. So it might seem like closing costs are expensive, but property tax are really low. So you pay it once. Now think about your own home for a second. Whether you're in New Jersey or British Columbia or California or Texas, what do you pay for your property tax in the condo or home you live in? $4,000, $8,000, $10,000 a year? Here we pay this amount once. And actually the closing costs are not that extreme when you understand everything they encompass. So let's just jump right into that and I'll show you. Okay, so first you have to, the lawyer does all this for you, I just want to say. That's why you pay these costs and it feels like at home, but the lawyer does all the work for you. So a buyer will pay for the public registry fees, meaning the deed, I mentioned previously that the notario has to register the title at the public registry. Well, there's a cost to that, and that in this case of a $173,000 investment was $482. There is the acquisition tax, which is similar to property transfer tax, and that is $5,623. That's a 3% of, in this state, it's 3% property transfer tax or acquisition tax. And it used to be 2% until January 1st this year, so things went up a little bit. There's always an appraisal, even though it's a cash purchase, there's always an appraisal. That's $260 in the case of a $173,000 purchase. Between the purchase contract, when you sign the purchase contract and you and the seller say, yeah, let's do this, we're going forward, the lawyer will put a preventive notice at the public registry, and that preventive notice prevents any buyer, not a buyer, any other person from taking action on the title, saying such as, oh, the person owes me money, and making false claim to a property. So the preventive notice is a really important consideration that a lawyer will do for you. There's a cost to that. It's in the case of this $173,000 purchase, it's $119. The Notario book, which is to record in his Notario book, the notarios are required by law to record in a book. It's $118. The escrow fee, that's in the case of a resale, when you put your money in escrow, the escrow company has a fee for that, $750. And to expedite everything through the Mexican Public Registry, as discussed previously, that's $100. That means you get your registered copy of your title quicker. And altogether, the total taxes and fees are $7,452. Wait, we're not done yet. We're not done yet. Legal fees, $2,000. The notario fee, the notario, for their services, for the honor of working with a notario who creates the deed, he can charge up to 2% of the property price, not always, but can. In this case, it's $4,117. And then there's sales tax on, those two fees. EVA, we call it EVA here. In Canada, it's called GST. And in the US, I don't know what it's called. But anyways, it's sales tax. It's a value-added tax in everything. And so then we have the foreign affairs authorization. Again, this is something unique to investing as a foreigner. Don't worry, the lawyer does all this for you. You don't have to deal with all these government agencies, but there's an authorization that the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs gives permission for any investor to invest in the restricted zone. By the way, we talked about the restricted zone and what it is and why it is, and that's why we have the fideicomiso. I can give you a lot more information on that later. But there is a fee for this federal government agency to provide a permit. And then there's the bank trust fees. Remember, putting the property in a bank trust as a foreigner in the restricted zone. There's a fee for that, and the total trust fees are, in this case, $1,100. That's setting up the trust and the first trust fee. So usually that means in this case it's, what is that? $550 for a bank trust. Remember, as discussed in previous webinar, the bank trust has a maintenance fee that you pay every year, and it's about, well, in this case, for this bank trust, it will be $550 for the year. And so the total closing cost on the purchase price of $173 is $17,153. As I mentioned, it's only once. Then your property tax bill is $400 a year, if that. Okay, so here's another one at a different price point. This is at a $400,000 price point. We have the same list of fees. The registering it at the public registry, $485. The acquisition tax, there's that 3% that pops up again. The appraisal, every property has an appraisal, and that's a percentage. The preventive notice, it's a standard fee. It's $122. So that prevents anybody, once you've signed the purchase contract, it prevents anybody from taking legal action on the deed. That's why, it's good to work with these lawyers. And then there's the expedition fee, which is $100 to get your property out of the Mexican public registry quicker. There's legal fees, and that's $3,190. There's notario fees. That's, again, up to 2%, not always. $7,954. Who has a calculator? Who can figure out that percentage? It's, I forgot my calculator right now, or I'd tell you the percentage. And there's the sales tax that's on the fees, not on the whole purchase, on the fees. Then there's the foreign affairs authorization. It's a standard, $1,100. And then there's the trust fees, again, $1,100, meaning it's 2 times a trust fee. It's 1 to set it up and 1 for the first annual payment. And it's standard. So on a $400,000 property, it's $30,028, and that's 7.5% of the purchase price. Going to have a lot of questions about that, I imagine, at the question and answer. Let me show you a third one from a different law firm. And, we work with a couple of law firms, but you can see they're usually fairly close. This is on a purchase price of $290,000, and the total everything is $21,713, which is 7.4%. So sometimes too, we can get the lawyers to reduce their fees. We can negotiate on certain things. There are some things, many things, which are not negotiable, but we can work with the notario and the lawyer to sometimes, not always, sometimes reduce their fees. So again, you will see the similar outline of the public registry, 162, certificate of no liens, the acquisition tax. That's that wonderful 3% of the purchase price. The ownership update, issuing cost, recording fee, that's to record it at the public registry, to get registered copies of your deed. There's the appraisal again, that's whether it's a bank loan or not, and it's all cash here anyways. And the notario, his fee, or her fee, it's $5,700. Remember, the notario can charge up to 2%, not always. The value-added tax and the total public notary fee. So what's missing in this one is the legal fees. They haven't included their legal fees in this closing, so that takes the closing price up above 7.4%, because they will charge on this sale price around $2,000 for their legal fees. Different firms have different prices for legal fees. So this one we're looking at, a closing cost quote for $290,000. This one is only relating to the title and the notario. They're not including in their own they're not including here their own legal fees or the escrow fee. So there you go. You have a couple of comparisons. Okay, so time to wrap up this investor session webinar. I appreciate all the attention that you have given us. I hope that you have gained some information that's useful to you. Let's just go to a question and answer period. And before we do, please remember, next investor session webinar, we are going to be discussing after the sale, the annual costs and monthly costs of ownership, and the concept of renting and things like that. That's next webinar, investor session webinar. For now, let's just handle some questions about what we discussed in this one, just as a quick refresh. Lawyers, notarios, roles, closing costs, okay?